Number four is an inconsistent roller coaster. That's one way of saying it. The other way is what is challenging in screenplays is called the slow middle. You have act one that sets things up. You have act two that resolves everything. And act two, which is really equal in length to act one plus act three together, that's where the protagonist is testing and learning and going through the special world and trying to learn those skills that they need to learn to resolve the problem that's presented in act one, but is solved in act three. Well, the problem is that when you're going through act two, because it's so long, I mean, it's twice as long as act one and it's twice as long as act three, is that you tend to slow down. You tend to try to, maybe there is too much exposition, but it becomes slow and muddled. And okay. So there's a whole way, there's a very good way that I explain in the book and on my blog and in my online story craft training about how you avoid that slow middle. And it's by creating a roller coaster with pinch points. And there's turning points. There's people oftentimes think of a movie as having at least two turning points, one at the end of act one and the other one at the end of act two. And that turn the protagonist in a totally different direction to help resolve the problem. But there's actually, let's see, there's an inciting, these are all turning points in a good film. There's the inciting incident. There's the act one climax. There's pinch point A. There's the moment of grace. There's pinch point B. There's act two climax. There's the final incident. And then there is, in fact, the final conclusion or the climax of the story. Those are all turning points. There's 8 turning points. And if you position those things about every 12.5% through the movie, and you change the direction that the protagonist is going, or you change the emotional response that the audience is feeling from hopeful to depression to exciting to dull to action to dialogue. Those things create a roller coaster effect emotionally and physically. It's like the boy with the clover or the flower, the petal of a flower, and he says, "She loves me. She loves me not. She loves me. She loves me not." Well, that's a good romantic comedy. Boy loses girl, boy gets girl. Boy loses girl, boy gets girl.
All right.
It's your roller coaster. And you've got to position those turning point elements about every 12.5% or 12 pages or so in your 100-page script. So that's number 4. Any question about that?
No, well, I enjoy looking at your blog and seeing when you break down a script with those roller coasters. It's fascinating.
And the good filmmakers do it really well. I mean, well, and I won't go into that. I talk and give clips in my workshops, and it's pretty exciting to see how good filmmakers, and sometimes they do this kind of subconsciously. It's not like they've plotted it out on paper. I mean, eventually they do, but it's almost like a script is handed out to someone, and they say, "Well, what do you think about this script?" And the star or the producer say, "Well, I don't know. It seems a little slow here." And they go back and forth with all these revisions. And eventually they end up with something that has a natural feeling to it, a natural law, a natural rhythm, or the roller coaster. And so they don't always plot it out, but they get there
they get there. They get there
eventually.
Yeah. Okay.
Number 5. Natural law action. Another way to explain natural law action is to simply say that every effect has a cause. It's the cause and effect. If a character does something, there has to be a natural consequence to that action.
Yes.
If a character makes a decision and takes that action, there has to be a natural law effect to that. And oftentimes you'll have people write a scene where a character will do something and there is no effect. They'll do something evil and there's no consequence. There's no judgment. That takes the audience out of the story. Unless you're showing it to gangsters, in which case they want that to happen.
That's right.
But then you're in a different diegesis.
Maybe I won't get caught. That's right.
one of the ways, going back to the show and tell thing, one of my criticisms of a lot of faith films is that there's this idea, there's ideology that Christian filmmakers have that to solve the problem, you have to have a scene where the protagonist who's having a problem goes in and sits with a pastor and gets counseled, or sits in a church and listens to a sermon. And in the sermon or in the counseling words from the counselor or the pastor, there's a solution to his problem, and he goes out and implements that, and everything's fine. Well, that's not natural law. That's not the way we learn. Now, a pastor may be able to explain something to you in a sermon as to why things work in natural law, but the way natural law really works is that it works like this. If you go rob a store, that's the action. The consequence, you get arrested and go to prison. And it's in prison that you get saved. It's not in the pastor's office.
Yeah. Once after the fall.
Yeah, there's got to be a natural cause and effect that the audience recognizes. You have to remember that movies are visual. They're not verbal mediums. A stage play oftentimes has to be verbal because you can't show things. But there's no reason why you can't show things in a movie. So you have to show it, not tell it. And the showing has to be consistent with natural law. Okay. Yeah. So that's number 4. Natural law action, the cause and effect have to make logical sense. And there has to be an effect to a cause.
And this, that's interesting about this one is that, like, when you're writing for screen, the understanding, like, how to do that.
Yeah.
Like that's, it's not like
that's why the biggest problem in filmmaking is budget.
Yeah.
Having the money.
Right.
Yeah. You have to have the money. Stan Freberg, God bless his soul. I bought all his albums. He had one album called Pay Radio, and it was called Pay Radio because you had to go into your record store and buy it. And he had all kinds of gimmicks on there. And so he talks about the great, wonderful things that you could do with radio that you couldn't do with TV. And one was you had the Royal Canadian Air Force fly over a lake that was filled with milk chocolate and dropped a maraschino cherry into the milk chocolate and then drained it, right? So he does that all with sound effects, and your imagination fills in, visually. But that's visual storytelling. You have to, and of course, in movies, you use sound effects to create images in the audience's mind that you possibly can't show on screen.
So, okay, maybe to that point, I don't want to take you too off track, but was it Psycho or one? Like, so much stuff is off screen.
Yeah.
Like the reaction of the character and stuff.
Yeah. Well, in one of the Jesus movies, one of the better Jesus movies, one of my favorite, I forget, it may be Zeffirelli's Jesus, I forget, but it's when Lazarus is raised from the dead. We never see Lazarus get up. We see him after he exits the tomb, but we never see him exit the tomb. I don't think we do. What we see are the reactions of all the apostles and the people and Mary and
wow.
We see the reaction
with sound, like they probably put some sound in there too.
Yeah, possibly. But the reaction shots are like sound effects.
Yeah.
We don't see it, but we imagine it because we're stimulated, we're triggered to think something,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Very good.
Okay,
good.
So that cause and effect is number 5. Number 6 is a stream of consciousness as opposed to a constructed plot. This is where, in fact, I'm working with one writer right now out in LA, and she's very creative. She's just very visual, but she tends to write a stream of consciousness of what's happening without plotting it out. She's essentially a pancer. We call writers pantsers or plotters. And a pantser is someone that will the imagination is wild and fertile, and they'll start writing, but it won't have any. There may be some logical gaps, and we don't understand it, and it's not constructed to flow like a roller coaster effect, cause and effect. And so
Yeah.
what happens? You end up with this stream of consciousness, and you have to, as a critic like I do, I'll have to read it and say, okay, what is she really thinking here? What's really going on? And
Mhm.
oftentimes, a lot of writers, I probably 50% of the writers I work with, they will write something down that doesn't make any sense. And after you talk to them, you'll say, oh, well, that makes sense. I understand why you wrote that now. But guess what? You didn't tell me that in the script.
Yeah.
It was in their brain,
Yeah.
but it wasn't on the paper.
Oh,
And so when I'm reading it, I can't read their mind. I'm trying to figure it out. And so they're
right.
kind of, it's almost like writing down all the effects, but never writing down the causes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's almost like the importance of putting yourself in the audience shoes or seat.
you have
Like,
to, yeah, yeah. And that's why it's so
I mean, I'm
important to
guilty
have
of that.
anybody read it out loud with, sit down. Like when I write stuff, Pam, my wife, she'll always read my stuff, or I'll sit down and read it to her.
Yeah.
And she'll say, wait a minute, why did that happen? And I'll say, and I'll explain it eventually. And she says, well, you didn't say that,
Yeah.
you know. And so it takes people out of the story.
Right.
We
Right.
lose the track, you know. You have to,
Right.
sometimes you have to be explicit about what's going on. That's why when you see someone walking out of the house and they've got, and the idea is that they've got to drive across town to a meeting or to some event, um, you have to see them get in the car and at least drive for 10 seconds, right? And then you can
Mm.
see the car pull up into the front of the new building.
Mm.
You can leave gaps for the audience to fill in, but the gaps can't be too big. You can't
Right.
see them. You can't see them walk out of your living room, or they're sitting in their living room like Archie Bunker, and Archie Bunker gets up and he walks over to the kitchen, and the next thing you see him in the lodge. Well, wait a minute. What? How? Why did he go there? What happened?
Yeah. Yeah.
That,
Yeah. Yeah.
that that's a gap that, I mean, if you've established it as a motif, that works, like you've
Right.
seen it before, but you can't do it initially. You have to fill in the gaps. So
Yeah.
that's stream of consciousness. Number
Gotcha.
7, a lack of value-based motivation. Number 7 is trying to remind people that, and this goes at the heart of the moral premise, which I'm not really going to talk about right now. We're going to talk about that later. But every action, every character that acts on something is, they've done that action based on a value. So I'll say to a room full of people listening to me talk, I said, you came here today and sat down because of a value that you figured that hopefully I was going to say something that would help you be a better writer. That's a value. You value your craft. You value learning. And so you make the decision and you take the action to get in your car, pay your money, whatever it takes, and to get into that class so that you can learn. You can get that degree, you can get that certification. You can't have characters doing things without also making it clear, often implicitly, why they're doing it. What is the motivation inside their brain? We do nothing without first having a value in our mind and making a decision that we're going to do something. So you have to have that value. Now, I think I'm going to talk about this later on, but let me try to
Okay.
reinforce this right here, because this is really important.
Yeah.
When you're looking at a character, you have to look at him as a real live person. And that real live person does 3 things consciously. They have a value that they're conscious of, or that maybe they're subconscious about it. But if you ask them, well, is drinking water during the day important? Well, I've never thought about it, but you do it. I notice you keep taking sips of that water bottle. Well, yeah, I guess that is important to me, but I never thought. I just do it unconsciously. Okay, but it's a value. You hydrate yourself. Okay.
Okay.
The next thing that they do voluntarily is they actually pick up the bottle and drink the water. That's the action. So there's the value. I need to hydrate. That's
Mm.
their value that they voluntarily hold. Voluntarily, they pick up the water and they hydrate themselves. And let's see, I've gotten, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. There's the value, and then there's the decision. The value is in your mind, the decision is in your mind. And then the third thing is outside. That's external. That's the action. You take the action. So those three things we do. The fourth thing in the cycle, and this continues as a cycle throughout our life, is the consequence, the natural law consequence of taking that action. Now, let's say that we have, to make this clear, two things are in the brain. I have a value and I make a decision. The next two things are outside in our body. We take the action and there's a physical consequence.
Yeah.
So let's say the value is, I don't like water. I'm not going to drink it. Okay. And
Okay.
so the action you take is it's a negative action. You refuse to drink when someone offers it to you. And well, that's actually the action. The decision is that I'm going to refuse it, and the action is that I don't take it. I really don't drink the water. The consequence is that you may faint from dehydration. You have no control over that. So characters have control over the value, the decision, and the action, but they have no control over the natural law consequence. So always make sure that your characters have a value that they're using, whether it's a good value or a bad value. Value doesn't mean it's good. It can be a vice. So in my book, The Moral Premise, we talk about virtues or values or good values, and vices are the bad values. And they both have physical consequences.
The consequence. The consequence seems like a really fun place to keep the story interesting. Or maybe, I don't know if that could be a pinch or something like that.
Sure.
But because sometimes things happen in life, like our consequences are different than what we expected.
Right. Yeah. No, definitely. And in fact, in a movie, as opposed to let me do it this way.
Okay.
In a novel, you're going to read the character's inner monologue where they are articulating their values and they're debating the decision, and then they take the action. But in a movie, unless you often don't understand the character's values
Yeah.
or the struggle they go through with the decision, although they may have a shadow character or a sidekick where the decision is debated, the dilemma, the moral dilemma is debated,
Okay.
and then
Yeah.
the action is taken. But typically in a movie, it's mostly the action that's taken and the consequence to that action. That's almost what a movie is.
Yeah.
Almost all a movie is, that is. And that's what's so writers have to understand that this is why thrillers and chase scenes and adventures are the more popular genres, because we're not thinking, we're not talking. There's the who was the Linkletter filmmaker, Art Linkletter's son, famous filmmaker. Uh, he did all those talkies,
Okay.
and like before sunrise, before sunset, and after midnight, and all that. And it's
Yeah.
just two people talking, Ethan Hawke and Julia Delphi, I think, walking through Paris or someplace talking, and they're philosophicals. Well, those are okay for people that like words, but those are not the most popular movies, and they're
Yeah.
harder to sell.
You're depending a lot on the actor at that point, I would think.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
And Julie Delphi and Ethan Hawke are two interesting people to talk to. I mean, to
Yeah.
listen talking to each other, especially as they're walking through Paris, because there's landscapes behind them the whole time.
Right. And
And what's
posting.
so interesting about those movies, and this is um, Linkletter and the scripts were written by Linkletter and Delphi and Hawke. They collaborate on the script. And what's so interesting about it, it looks like they're just ad-libbing off an outline, all three of these movies. But in fact, they're tightly scripted and they memorized everything. At least that's what I'm told. Pretty
Huh.
amazing.
Yeah. No, right.
But they are interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's number 7, the
That
lack of
was 7.
value-based motivation.
So if you'd like to get ahead of this conversation, you can head over to Stan's website. You go to stanwilliams.com and you'll see there he actually has his Storycraft training online for free. He just started releasing it. So this is kind of a huge deal. I hope you take advantage of it. I've learned so much from Stan, and we're going to go and explore more points on our next podcast. We'll tackle a few more. Mark your calendars. It's coming up. We're going to have the Lumen Summit, October 2nd through the 4th. It's going to be in Florida, in Jacksonville. And if you are a Catholic filmmaker, if you're a professional Catholic filmmaker, you're invited. So you can go to lumen.tv to learn a little bit more. Next time I see you, hope to see Christ in you.